To them as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Mr. Chair, for a moment there I thought the member in charge of the bill might be rising to his feet, but thank you very much for giving me the call. On Clause 8 of the Hamilton City Council Parana Park Land Vesting Bill, this is actually a very important clause in this bill because it was obviously an important factor that the Council decided to include this clause for the sake of avoidance of doubt, for the sake of certainty, I suppose. Because in fact, all three sub-clauses refer to taxes and duties which have come under some scrutiny and attention from this government. There have been changes, or at least there have been an announcement of intended changes on each one of these sub-clauses. So it's probably quite a good idea from the Hamilton City Council to include Clause 8 to give them some certainty. I would like to look at, to start with, Mr. Chair, Clause 8A. Which says that the land, to avoid doubt, the vesting of this land is not a dutiable gift for the purposes of the Estate and Gift Duties Act 1968. And people will know this as gift duty, which is the tax that you pay if you gift a large asset or a large amount of money, I think in excess of $27,000 in one financial year, then you have to pay gift duty on that asset. And the reason why that is, the chair shakes his head. I don't know. Maybe I'm not quite accurate, but I know I'm in the zone anyway. I'm giving it the general guts of what this is about. And of course, gift duty is all about ensuring that people who have considerable assets cannot hide those assets or dispose of them in a way that allows them to avoid paying their fair share of tax. And the government has announced that their intention to abolish gift duty. And this will allow the government's mates who have massive assets, whether it be in land or whether it be in shares or whether it be in any other form that an asset can take, even cash, to be able to perhaps gift those assets to a family member or someone close to them, and that would assist them to avoid paying their fair share of tax. And that is something that just seems outrageous when this government has increased taxes on middle and low income, hard-working wage and salary earners, that they are having to pay more taxes through GST, which is also referred to in this clause, and I'll come back to that later on. When they are paying more taxes, that this government has allowed or has announced that it is going to allow people of significant wealth, people who can afford to pay their fair share, people who can contribute to the community, to society and to the country, to make sure that we can get ourselves out of debt, that we can grow the economy, that we can provide the services that the government ought to be providing to New Zealanders. Those people are going to be able to hide their assets and avoid paying their fair share of tax. And Mr. Chair, I don't think that's on. But it does seem appropriate, given that this is about vesting a particular piece of land. This isn't a gift. So it seems appropriate that the Hamilton City Council sought to have that clarified in this bill. But in fact, of course, if this bill had just taken a little bit longer to pass through the House, and I know it's already taken a little longer than perhaps the member in charge of the bill thought it might, but if it had taken just a little bit longer, we might have found that this clause was obsolete and unnecessary, because the government would have gone ahead and abolished gift duty for everybody and created that unfairness where people who can afford to pay tax would be able to avoid doing so, while they've increased tax on those people who can least afford it. And that takes me to Clause 8B, which is about goods and services tax, which again will not be applied to this vesting of this particular piece of land. And that's a very good move, a wise move, I think, on behalf of the Hamilton City Council, because they would have been paying a whole lot more under this government in GST, because this government has increased GST. So whilst it's making more loopholes for wealthy people to hide their assets and reduce the tax that they have to pay, it has increased tax on ordinary, hard-working Kiwi families who are spending most of what they earn at the supermarket. Those families who are simply getting by from one week to the next or from one fortnight to the next, they have to pay 15% GST in the way that the City Council will not have to pay. Mr Chair.
Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. The Hamilton City Council will not have to pay 15% GST under Clause 8B of this bill, but hard-working, ordinary Kiwi families who don't have massive assets, who don't have large tracts of land from which to generate income, who are living from one week to the next, who are just trying to put food on the table for their families and for their children, they are having to pay that full 15% GST that is excluded in Clause 8B of this bill. And of course, Clause 8C refers to the sale or disposition, distribution or transfer of property or liability for the purposes of the Income Tax Act 2007. And of course this was another area where the Hamilton City Council obviously decided in advance that they were going to have to make sure that they had some certainty and clarity around income tax, because the government has made a number of announcements on income tax. They were a bit all at sea at first. First they cut taxes as soon as they came into government, then they realised that wasn't affordable, so they repealed those tax cuts. Then they introduced some more tax cuts. It turns out that they weren't affordable either, and now the government's coffers are in such a bad way that they're having to borrow millions and millions of dollars every week to pay for the income tax cuts that they provided to people on the very, very highest incomes. This piece of land, if there was income being derived from this particular piece of land, the Hamilton City Council actually would have received quite a significant tax cut, because the income derived from this land would be quite significant. But if they were just salary and wage earners who were earning at the lower end, they would have received very, very little. And in fact, it would have been very, very important, even doubly important, that Clause 8B was included, because they would have wanted to avoid that GST, because the increase in GST for salary and wage earners was much larger than what they received in the pitiful tax cuts that they got if they were at the bottom end, at the lower end of income. So, Mr Chair, I think Clause 8 is a massively important clause in this bill, because this bill is all about giving certainty about the nature of this land, the status of this land as a public asset. And of course, we have already discussed how the Hamilton City Council is doing such a wonderful job of ensuring that this piece of land remains a public asset, and it would be unreasonable to expect the Hamilton City Council to pay gift duty, to pay GST, or to have to pay income tax on what is simply a change or a re-establishment of the description of this land, rather than an actual sale or a change in title of this land. These provisions are sensible and important for the City Council, but wouldn't ordinary New Zealanders like to have this applied to them? Wouldn't ordinary New Zealanders like to not have to pay the 15%, National's 15% GST? Wouldn't ordinary New Zealanders like to get the kind of tax cuts that the people at the top have been able to get, and which are reflected in the income tax cut that the City Council gets from this particular clause? So, Mr Chair, it is a very sensible clause. It's important that there is certainty for the City Council. It is important that this piece of land, the Parana Park, is retained as a public asset. It's great to see that the Hamilton City Council isn't hocking it off to pay their bills. They've obviously got much better fiscal management than what this government has, and they are able to retain their assets. They're not having to sell them off to foreigners in the way that this government is doing. And so from that point of view, Mr Chair, we see the Labour opposition is very, very comfortable with Clause 8 as it sits in the bill, and we thoroughly support it, and we think that having these sorts of clarifications in a bill like this is very important for the Hamilton City Council, and we hope that this gives them the certainty they require to retain Parana Park in its current state.